We know who we work for. We work for patients. We work for their families. We work for anyone impacted by cancer. That's what Friends does. They may not know about us, but they don't have to. We're doing the work accelerating policy change, supporting groundbreaking science, and getting new therapies to people quickly and safely. Too often, cancer breakthroughs can't rise above the noise. Without someone to champion them, life-changing treatments might not reach a patient for years. For so many patients, the drugs they take now only work for so long. The clock is ticking. They need a new treatment, and they need it yesterday. That's why we stay vigilant. That's what Friends does. We bring scientists together with industry and policymakers, unite them with shared trust, and guide them towards meaningful cooperation. Then we get to work, creating the blueprint to build real-world solutions fast. There's no time to waste. Once we set a goal, we push, we poll, we talk, we listen, we advocate. We leave no stone unturned. That's how breakthroughs transpire. That's how better policies happen. That's how patients get what they need. We listened to patients, gathered the experts, and within a year, we made breakthrough therapies a reality for thousands. When we did, it changed the culture, shifting the way the system worked for the better. We partnered to design a whole new structure for our clinical trial and broadened entry at unprecedented levels, pioneering one of the most innovative trials ever. We broke down barriers, fought unfair and unnecessary exclusions, and expanded access to clinical trials. We set a new standard for measuring how a patient might respond to a new therapy. We're making research work. We're making legislation work. We're making trials work because we know who we work for and we know what's at stake. So we're not stopping. We'll keep striving for change for patients everywhere. That's what Friends does.
Good afternoon. I'm Ellen Sigal, Chair and Founder of Friends of Cancer Research. Welcome to the Friends of Cancer Research annual meeting. As you can tell, our meeting looks very different this year. We are not in person, and I have to say, I miss all of you, and I miss seeing you and talking to you, but I can promise you that the content will be terrific. Everyone has worked really hard, and you will be hearing very, very interesting and important comments. I want to thank the staff and everyone at Friends who's worked so hard and all the people who work with us. And I also want to thank you for your amazing support of us. This should be an interesting and meaningful meeting. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephen Hahn, the head of the FDA. He certainly has taken over at a time where there are enormous challenges for the country, and he has done extremely well.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be back with you again, albeit virtually. The work that this organization does in terms of the support you provide to researchers, the collaborative support you give to agencies like the FDA, and the hope that you give to patients is profound. As someone who has spent my life immersed in researching and treating cancer, I know just how valuable your efforts are in the search for developing new treatments and cures. As you're well aware, we've been engaged in responding to the public health emergency triggered by the SARS-CoV-2 virus for more than 8 months now. While we continue to make progress in our understanding of this disease, our work is nowhere near done. We must continue our collaborative efforts to help contain the spread and to find new treatments and vaccines. When I spoke to this group just a few months ago, I outlined some of the developments in our ongoing efforts to counter the virus and to support the development of a vaccine. We are making important progress, and the FDA continues to provide the essential regulatory advice, guidance, and technical assistance needed to respond to this disease. In my brief remarks today, I want to underscore that even as we've been working around the clock to take on the extraordinary challenges of responding to the pandemic, with what has represented an approximate doubling of our workload, our centers and offices have continued to maintain the agency's regular mission-critical responsibilities. Some good news on this front is that through the Cures pathway established by Congress, we've been able to increase hiring over the past year. For FY20, the FDA hired 2,308 staff, with a total net gain of 1,027, compared to an FY19 net gain of 135. We've also made significant progress with the percentage of Cures hires from the outside the agency, as 54% of our Cures hires have been external. This represents an important achievement for the agency, especially at a time when our focus has rightfully been on the global pandemic. It's meant we're better equipped to maintain our high standards of food safety, continue to approve safe and effective new drugs and biologic products, approving and clearing important medical devices, and of course, continuing our oversight of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes. Our work in the cancer space also continues full force, offering great promise. You'll hear a good deal about some of this work shortly from the head of our Oncology Center of Excellence, Dr. Pazdur, but I wanted to highlight just a few exciting developments, including some of this work that has been related to COVID-19. For instance, we are studying closely whether, as some reports have indicated, patients with cancer have worse outcomes than others with COVID-19. One way we're gathering these and other data is with the COVID-19 Evidence Accelerator run by the Reagan-Udall Foundation and Friends of Cancer Research. Among other research activities, the Accelerator community is applying real-world data to help characterize the natural history of patients with cancer and COVID-19, including long-term sequelae, thereby strengthening our science-based response to this unprecedented public health emergency. We're also leveraging our research-based collaborative agreements with several main real-world data companies to support rapid characterization of COVID-19 incidence in cancer populations, as well as its impact on treatment and outcomes. And we are continuing to address the impact the pandemic has had and will likely continue to have on the conduct of clinical trials of medical products, from quarantines, infections of participants, site closures, travel limitations, or interruptions to the supply chain for investigational products. We are studying and supporting sponsors and trial sites in their work addressing these challenges. For instance, we released the FDA guidance on conduct of clinical trials of medical products during the COVID-19 pandemic and have updated the guidance several times to address inquiries received from stakeholders. In addition, we established a central email box for sponsors and investigators to send inquiries regarding clinical trial conduct and have responded to over 500 inquiries to date. Meanwhile, we continue full speed ahead on our non-COVID cancer-related work, including important drug approvals. For instance, as of October 30, CDER had approved 42 novel drugs, including 15 new drugs to treat patients with various forms of cancer. Several of these approvals have been firsts for oncology, including the first FDA-approved therapy, Tabrecta, to treat non-small cell lung cancer with specific mutations. Retevmo, the first therapy approved specifically for lung and thyroid cancer patients with RET gene alterations. And Tazverik, the first treatment option specifically for patients with epithelioid sarcoma, a rare soft tissue cancer that often occurs in young adults. And this is just a small sampling. As this group well understands, for decades, we've seen a significant shift in the direction oncology has been heading, ever since the discovery of hormone receptor status in breast cancer. Increasingly, rather than necessitating separate development programs for each disease site, these types of approvals are irrespective of organ site or histology. Sponsors may need to focus on both drug and biomarker development to pursue site-agnostic indications, and multiple sponsors may be pursuing the same site-agnostic indication as well as developing a companion diagnostic test. We encourage sponsors to work collaboratively on biomarker and companion diagnostic development. Work and research in the cancer field continues to be promising, helping to shape and inform so many other types of medical research and to spur the development of new and creative treatments across medicine. It's in large part thanks to your work and commitment that we are able to realize much of this potential. In closing, Let me just once again thank the Friends of Cancer Research for everything you do to support patients and innovation, for your partnership with the FDA, and for your support of our public health mission.
Thank you, Dr. Hahn, for those insightful comments. We are grateful to you and really grateful for your leadership. Now it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you Dr. Richard Pazdur. But of course, he needs no introduction. Everybody knows who he is. And most of all, we're all extremely grateful for his service, for his science, for his leadership, for his innovation, and mostly for what he does for patients every single day. It is a great honor to introduce Dr. Pazdur.
And thank you, Ellen, for your leadership in oncology, and welcome to White Oak, the FDA headquarters.
I want to start a little bit with COVID and what this has done to our country, what it has done to our nation, what it has meant to all patients, and particularly cancer. Our cancer patients are highly vulnerable, and they want to make sure that they're not left out of this equation because they are being hit very badly. And perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about what you're doing and what's happening in cancer, and specifically cancer and COVID.
Well, we recognized very early that it was important for us to be there for the cancer patients, the group of medical oncologists and all the people that work in oncology at the FDA. And these include many people, including medical oncologists, pediatric oncologists, radiation oncologists, surgical oncologists, our basic science people. We all were committed to being there for the cancer patient. This is a very difficult time for everybody in the United States in every aspect of our lives. And so we really wanted to make a concerted effort to make sure that patients with cancer do not feel forgotten in this pandemic. And I think that is an important concept that I would like to really emphasize to you. During this period of time, when we left in mid-March, when the COVID pandemic blossomed, so to speak, we had really a series of listening sessions with the oncology community. And these included professional groups, patient groups, individual patients rather. And one of the resounding comments that were made, especially by the patients, is that they felt forgotten. Everything was about COVID, 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 rightly so. So what we really decided to do is really marshal our forces in oncology. And so we did not miss a beat here. We, I think, put out something over 12 to 15 guidances during this period of time. We approved 33 new indications, many new molecular entities.
Well, we are very grateful to you, and cancer patients are incredibly grateful, and all patients. So thank you. The patient has always been your North Star.
Well, Ellen, one of the things that I looked at is, as you know, my wife underwent cancer treatment and obviously succumbed from her disease 5 years ago. And I couldn't imagine going through that whole journey with her during this period of time with all the disruption that the patient with cancer would face. Okay, so I fully understand from a personal level really the impact that this pandemic had on patients that were being treated for cancer.
I want to shift a little bit to some of the pilots and some of the programs that you have been really leading, like RTOR, Real-Time Oncology Review, and Project Orbis. Those are pilots. Can you tell us where they're going, and if you are looking at other pilots, because we know that you always like to innovate? It would be interesting to hear more about that.
Well, we have many programs that are ongoing in the Oncology Center of Excellence. The RTOR program, the Real-Time Oncology Review program, was basically a program that we set up to really jumpstart the review process So while the pharmaceutical companies are preparing their reports for official FDA submission, they are submitting that data to us. We begin our review of that data. And I think that this is a really invaluable project, especially for breakthrough therapy products, where there is an interest in really to avail these drugs as soon as possible to the American public, because they have a major impact on their health and on the treatment of this disease. This is coupled by another project that we have called an assessment aid, where we work with the pharmaceutical sponsor to reduce the redundancy of reports, etc. We really want our reviewers to concentrate really on the intellectual aspect, what's going on, what their comments are, their critical reviews, rather than simply writing report after report after report.
And a little bit about Project Orbis.
Yeah, Project Orbis was a offshoot of an international program that we had developed. The submission of these applications went to all of the members of the Project Orbis countries that would like to participate in the review of these applications. And this would become a collaborative, not a joint review, but a collaborative review. Now this has grown tremendously. It started out basically with Canada, Australia, and Switzerland, and then it went to Singapore, and hopefully in January the UK will join us. And there's discussion also on the way with having Brazil as well as Israel join the project. So it's really gained a lot of momentum, and I think that this perhaps is one of the things that I feel most proud of, because it really has allowed important medications to be really accessed on a global basis. Many times people look at government as just kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again, as if we were just filling out forms in the Social Security office or something like this. But really, this is a much different job. And I really challenge the reviewers, our medical oncologists, pediatric oncologists, our basic sciences, our statisticians that work with us, really, to look at the system and see how we can improve it. Because that's really, I feel, the fun of the job, really taking a process and really transforming it.
Well, you know how to execute and lead. So today's conference, Friends of Cancer Research, is on Beyond Breakthrough, Expedited Reviews, and re-looking at these programs. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Rick, and what you're thinking about that?
Yeah.
Beyond Breakthrough.
I've been very impressed that, throughout the years, we have developed many of these expedited programs, and they range from fast track to RMAT to priority reviews to breakthrough therapies. And I really challenge people to kind of take a look at all of these programs and how we could actually simplify them. We spend a lot of time at the FDA designating all of these different programs and what drugs should go into them. And to be honest, there's a lot of overlap that exists. And I think one of the important things that has come out of really this discussion is really to critically look at what goes on after we make these designations. It's not so much the designation, it's what occurs afterwards. And that's one of the new projects that we have called Beyond Breakthrough, and we've discussed this with Friends of Cancer Research, really to assist us in looking at the various parts of breakthrough therapy, the various disciplines that are involved, both with the pharmaceutical industry and their counterparts then in the FDA, to look at what are the pain points and what are potential ways of improving the process here. The designation means nothing unless one actually executes it. And we have this broad generalization that it's an all hands on deck. Well, that's very broad, but let's get into some granularity. What are the specific types of meetings that one needs? What are the major questions that perhaps need to be answered earlier? Some of these questions include the following. I don't think we've done a really good job in dosing of oncology drugs. Most of our information is derived from the area of cytotoxic therapies, where we looked at maximum tolerated dose. We don't do a lot of dose studies looking at varying doses of drugs, and perhaps we need to take a closer look at that rather than just going with a dose of a drug in a single-arm study. The other thing that we have to look at is many of the applications in oncology, especially as we move into different subsets of diseases, okay, and the subsetting and clustering or categorization of smaller and smaller patient groups, those trials are going to be smaller. They're probably going to be single-arm trials, because randomized trials will not be able to be done just because of the patient numbers. And that has some issues about how we review drugs. And I'm not talking about the clinical portion of it, but I'm talking about the manufacturing of the drugs. When we have an application that has 50 patients in it, well, that may not take a long time for a clinical review. However, the same expertise for the manufacturing of the drug has to be done whether it has 50 patients, 500, or 5,000, so to speak. So we really need to work and make sure that as we move forward with breakthrough therapy, that we have everybody on the same page and they're moving in the same direction.
So now I want to shift a little bit to the formulation of OCE, the Oncology Office of Excellence, Center of Excellence. And for Friends of Cancer Research and the entire community, we have worked very, very, very hard of consolidation of cancer and integration, knowing the complexity of the disease. Is it working as envisioned, or is it still a work in progress?
Well, it depends on whose vision you say and want to contemplate. I think the way the OCE was envisioned really has not been fully implemented. Okay, there have been many issues since 4 years ago when the OCE was formulated. Obviously, it came from the Moonshot program of President-elect Joe Biden. And there have been many issues here that have occurred over the past 4 years. Obviously, there was a change in administration shortly after the initiation of the OCE. There have been multiple commissioners here at the FDA, and then the pandemic also took the spotlight away from cancer to obviously the pandemic, and here again, rightly so, because obviously this was a national problem that needed to be addressed. So there were many intervening forces here during these last 4 years, and I would hope that with a new administration coming, that we would see a renewed interest in really reevaluating what the role of the OCE should be and how it should be set up.
So it's fair to say the OCE is a work in progress. Stay tuned. Now I want to switch to something personal for all of us. Everyone knows the loss of cancer is personal to me. It's personal to you. It's certainly personal to Vice President-elect Joe Biden and to everyone, millions and millions of people. And what are we not doing? What do we need to do? What is the big picture vision? Because we all care about making progress, and we're making substantial progress, but we still have a fair amount to go. Talk a little bit about that.
I think that collaboration, cooperation, leadership needs to be there, okay? We don't have that to its fullest extent at this time. We have to be realistic that the major impetus of developing many of these drugs, at least the clinical trials that we see, are coming from the pharmaceutical industry. And that's just a fact. And are these companies working together as effectively as possible? And I think that really deserves some discussion. Obviously, Friends has been instrumental in bringing the stakeholders together. I think there's more of a need really to look at putting aside perhaps some of the competitive issues and working in a more collaborative space here. And that is with regards to many of the classes of drugs that we see in oncology.
I cannot thank you enough for your dedication, for what you have done, for your intellect, for your passion. I know it's personal, but the impact has been profound. Just continue doing what you're doing and stay really healthy. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ellen, for this opportunity to talk to you. Thank you for your support throughout the years for the OCE, for oncology, and most importantly, for the oncology patients.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Dr. Pazdur, for a terrific discussion. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeff Allen, President and CEO of Friends of Cancer Research. Today, we're very excited to have our first of 2 sessions of our 2020 annual meeting. I hope that you've had the chance to review the white papers that each working group has developed over the last several months, and we thank them for their efforts. Of note, some of the data included in today's white paper was developed using a new dashboard that has recently gone live on our website. This will be a new tool to be able to look at numerous aspects related to the use of expedited development tools in oncology over time. I invite you to explore it and use it as a resource. It's available at friendsofcancerresearch.org under Data-Driven Insights. To continue this discussion, I'll turn it over to Amy McKee from Parexel, who will be the moderator for our panel today discussing modernizing expedited development programs. Amy?
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to Friends of Cancer Research for inviting me and the rest of the panelists to discuss these important issues. I'd like to start with a brief presentation to introduce the topic to the audience so that you can understand some of the issues we'll be discussing in detail later. May I have the slides, please? So the topic is modernizing expedited development programs. Next slide, please. Friends of Cancer Research convened a group of experts to assess experiences and learnings by the various stakeholders from previous utilization of expedited programs and to develop proposals to maximize the usefulness of expedited programs at the agency. Next slide, please. FDA has 4 expedited programs plus the Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy, also known as RMAT program, which applies to regenerative therapies regulated within CBER. Some duplicative eligibility and features of these expedited programs are noted here. For example, in the eligibility section, all of the programs must be aimed at treating a serious condition or a disease. Also, in the features program, for example, the fast track designation, RMAT, and breakthrough all provide for increased communication between the agency and sponsors. Next slide, please. An analysis of all the expedited programs from 2012 to 2019 across FDA with breakdown between oncology and non-oncology programs is shown here. 90% of oncology programs used an expedited program compared to 55% of non-oncology programs. Priority review is the most frequently used program, followed by fast track, breakthrough therapy designation, and accelerated approval, although these numbers denote successful designations and not applications. Do note differences in utilization of various programs between oncology and non-oncology development programs. For example, in breakthrough therapy designation, although both oncology and non-oncology products received an equal number of designations, the oncology products had a far greater percentage who were able to receive breakthrough designation. If you look at accelerated approval, oncology products received a far greater absolute number of accelerated approvals and also had a greater percentage of their programs that received accelerated approval. Next slide, please. Expedited programs are often used in combination, which is not surprising given that qualification for programs can be similar. Combinations with breakthrough designation and accelerated approval are more commonly seen with oncology products. Fast track and priority review are most often used for non-oncology products. This leads to the question, is it more challenging for non-oncology products to receive breakthrough designation or accelerated approval? Next slide, please. Based on landscape analysis, experience, and learnings, the working group recommended a few key proposals. The panel discussion will cover additional details of each. Together, these recommended proposals are designed to modernize expedited development programs to ensure that they continue to facilitate the science and enable appropriate access to the new therapies for patients. However, is now the time to do more than modernize? Should we be reimagining these programs given the experience that we have to date with them? Should there be a more cohesive program at FDA with a unifying pathway to truly accelerate those products that are the most promising? And with that, I'd like to turn to introduce the panel formed from the working group. As well, I'd like to note to the audience that we have 2 additional members of our working group who will be answering questions online. We have Kathleen Winson from Genentech and Julia Beaver from FDA who will be answering questions online for you as you enter them. Joining us on the panel, we have Avi Eggimann from Bluebird Bio, Scott Korn from Genentech, B. Lavery from Genentech, Paul Melmeyer from Muscular Dystrophy Association, and Harpreet Singh from US FDA. So I'd like to start with a question, and perhaps we'll have Harpreet and B answer this question. Speeding the availability of drugs that treat serious diseases are in everyone's interest, especially when the drugs are the first available treatment for that particular disease, or if the drug has advantages over existing treatments. How have FDA's expedited programs helped with this effort? Harpreet?
Thanks, Amy, for the question, and thanks, of course, to Friends and to the panel. I think part of this landscape analysis was really to see objectively how have these programs helped bring novel and innovative therapies to patients sooner than they would have otherwise been made available. You heard in Amy's presentation that over 90% of oncology approvals, new drugs in the last several years, have utilized one, if not several of these expedited programs. And I think a very striking figure in the white paper is that drugs or development programs that utilize these expedited programs are on average approved 2 years faster than drugs that otherwise would not have been. And I think that's very clinically meaningful to patients. I will say that the OCE has amped it up a notch and has gone beyond what's in our regulatory toolbox and have included programs like RTOR and the Assessment, which you heard about in the opening remarks. But I think one comment that's really important is that, these various programs, 5 of them now, were not created in one kind of cohesive fashion, right? They were put together in a bit of a patchwork or piecework fashion. For example, priority review and accelerated approval pathway were promulgated in 1992. And then certainly we had breakthrough in 2012, and the most recent addition is RMAT in 2016. So really thinking about, the topic of this panel is if we were to reimagine all of these programs, where would we go from there? So I think there's no doubt that these programs have been successful in bringing therapeutics to patients more quickly. And I think the task ahead of us is really how do we improve upon that?
Yeah, thanks, Harpreet, and thanks, Amy. I can just add from a sponsor perspective, I can definitely confirm that the most obvious metric is decreased time that we have seen in development to approval and getting these important therapies to patients. I thought I'd comment on some less obvious aspects that have also contributed to this expedited development. One, with each of these programs as they've been developed, it's given greater opportunity for dialogue and scientific exchange, for real-time mutual understanding of the key issues. So we've been really encouraged by the real-time problem solving between our teams and the FDA review teams. Secondly, the efforts have actually caused us to rethink how we do things in our shop. So really reimagining how we can actually get the data and the information to the agency much quicker has actually benefited the entire organization because it's enhanced and innovated our sponsor processes. And then 3, that we've seen that FDA's expedited programs have also, in some degree, spurred other health authorities to also think differently about how they can expedite development. And as a sponsor with global development plans, even though it may add complexity, it actually is in great interest for patients to get these therapies much quicker also globally. So these are the things that kind of go behind the overall decreased time we also see specifically in the US.
Thank you. So we just heard briefly from Dr. Pazdur about some of these programs, and the white paper briefly touches on Oncology Center of Excellence pilots such as Assessment Aid, Orbis, and RTOR that can also expedite the reviews and approval. How might these be integrated into the current expedited pathways and utilized more broadly across the agency? And I'll turn to some of our industry representatives here, B and Scott, for this one. B?
So I can start, and Scott can obviously chime in. As I mentioned, the piece about re-envisioning how we do things in our shop has absolutely helped us think about how we may want to integrate our own processes. And I think that learning has been helpful for FDA as well. I'll give a couple of just key examples. One is how we actually submit data sets and documents in real time to the agency. We also saw with the assessment aid that even though it increased the resource and burden on our end, we saw how helpful that was to the agency to help streamline their review. And with the advent of Project Orbis, hearing about how the assessment aid has been a key tool for the dialogue across health authorities has been absolutely a welcome thing to hear. So it makes it all that effort worthwhile. So some of these elements that help increase collaboration and scientific discussion to speed development and review and approval are things that we're looking for. I think the key thing for us is that all of these learnings, especially whether it's on the sponsor side or the agency, should be and can be translated to other disease areas. As a company that also has non-oncology portfolio projects, we see a difference in how these programs are utilized. And so we would love to see that translated into other disease areas. We would love to see also some of these benefits translated earlier in development when you may not have as much clinical data as you might need for a breakthrough therapy designation. And then we would love to see anything that enhances cross-review discipline, engagement, and collaboration, particularly for complex drug development that may involve other areas like CDRH or have a lot of CMC issues to discuss. So I'll turn to Scott to add.
Scott, with your vast experience with all of these programs at Merck, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Amy. So at Merck, we've had very positive experience with RTOR and Orbis and Assessment Aid. Using Assessment Aid is now routine for all of our oncology submissions, and we could certainly envision using it for other types of applications. If those divisions agree, it would help their review staff to focus on the key issues. Now, I cannot say that using Assessment Aid has directly resulted in faster review times and approval, but I can say that our RTOR and Orbis have certainly done that, and we have multiple situations where RTOR and Orbis have given us more rapid approvals. Now, we understand that our RTOR and Orbis are not appropriate for every program, but where there is a large unmet need and the results are very clear, we would certainly welcome using those tools in other disease areas across OND.
Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question, because I'd like to shift gears a little bit and look outside the oncology setting. We have a representative here from outside the oncology setting. So Paul, do you believe use of these programs have been fully realized in diseases outside of oncology?
Well, thank you so much for the question, Amy, and it really is a privilege to be here with you today and the entire panel. So the short answer to your question is yes, but there's no doubt that expedited development programs have been well realized in the non-oncology space. There are some caveats, but we do know that the majority of orphan products have been awarded at least one expedited approval pathway, and we've seen products move incredibly quickly through the agency that have been truly transformative for the rare neuromuscular disease patient population that we represent. But onto those caveats, first of all, it can depend on which review division we're talking about here. To reiterate a point that pretty much everyone knows, FDA's oncology divisions and OCE are truly the envy of the non-oncology world. In non-oncology review divisions, they approach expedited development programs differently. Some are more cautious in awarding breakthrough designations than others. Some are more cautious in combining pathways such as fast track and accelerated approval. And others, once a pathway is actually awarded, may offer varying resources and benefits to the effort compared to other review divisions. In addition to that, novel products for rare neuromuscular diseases are oftentimes brand new in their class. The first time that a therapy in that class has been brought to FDA, they may employ novel mechanisms of action. They oftentimes use innovative endpoints that have yet to be evaluated by FDA. So it can be a bit more of a uphill battle for these non-oncology products to utilize expedited approval pathways, as there's less confidence, there's less familiarity or comfort surrounding the development of those products at FDA. Sometimes the science just hasn't yet caught up to the expedited development pathways. I can tell you in several rare neuromuscular diseases, the therapeutic developers there would absolutely love to utilize the accelerated approval pathway, but an early efficacy endpoint hasn't yet been validated or hasn't yet been established yet. And then even though OCE is still a work in progress, as Dr. Pazdur said at the outset, it still remains the envy of the non-oncology community, especially the pilot programs such as real-time oncology review. So as you can hear, it can depend. There are caveats, but the short answer is yes, expedited development programs have been fully realized outside of oncology, but with some caveats.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to discuss a little bit the cell and gene therapy area, because there is a separate designation, RMAT, that's available only to them, but they can avail themselves of all the other programs as well. So most of these programs were created before cell and gene therapies really took off. How has the agency adapted the needs of these to needs of these emerging therapies or diseases that are less well understood? And I'll turn to AV for this question.
Thank you, Amy. I'm very happy to be here today. So I think, as we've said, overall, these programs have been very positive and supportive of innovation. I think RMAT in particular has been very helpful for cell and gene therapies. We know RMAT designation can be granted a little bit earlier than breakthrough. It also allows for the use of real-world evidence as post-approval confirmatory evidence. So that's, I think, has been a good example of how expedited programs have adapted to the use of cell and gene therapy. But I think if we take a step back and we look at breakthrough and RMAT and the expedited programs, I think they've been very helpful, has been shared in increasing interactions with the agency. That's been fantastic, as well as accelerating clinical development. I think they have not been as helpful is in accelerating CMC development, and particularly for cell and gene therapy, which is an emerging and complex field. So I think this is an area that should be further explored, and we would encourage the agency to have a more holistic approach to advise sponsors in these expedited pathways to synchronize their clinical and CMC development, or link other complex parts of their development to ensure that they are tracking together. And lastly, just two small points. I think, especially for cell and gene therapy, would be great to think about pre-breakthrough, so sort of have earlier input on and how expedited pathways could help there. And then sort of maybe formalizing iterative and informal interactions. I think for cell and gene therapy, that's very important. Thank you.
So Paul, I'd like to turn this question to you as well, since muscular dystrophy is clearly an area where cell and gene therapy may play a role.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Amy. And you said it well. There are many gene therapies in the pipeline right now for neuromuscular diseases. I would echo everything AV said, and just maybe a few points to add. For one, expedited development programs, of course, by their very nature, can be very resource intensive for the agency and the specific divisions that are administering them. And we know within CBER, and specifically within the Office of Tissue and Advanced Therapeutics, its office is very under-resourced at the moment with all the gene therapies in front of them and the wave of BLAs that's already starting to hit them for gene therapies. So ensuring that that office, but CBER more generally, is resourced well enough to actually administer the expedited development programs in the way that allows for all of the resources that are available and that can be offered to these developers, that they are there. I'd also just add one additional point. Of course, within cell and gene therapies, it's a new frontier, and we're still discovering a lot. We still know that there are things to sort out with immunogenicity. There are still things to sort out with manufacturing, as well as many other items. But FDA, thankfully, is really on the forefront of leading that conversation. They've been holding workshops both before and after the pandemic had started. They've been really kind of leading the charge rather than sitting back and waiting for the outside world to kind of to lead for them. So I think CBER and FDA more generally deserves a lot of congratulation on that, as they really have been trying to truly lead in tackling some of these tough issues on innovative products.
Great, thank you. So the working group discussed opportunities for streamlining expedited programs in the pre-submission phase, particularly for processes associated with qualifying for these pathways. Does this redundancy lead to misapplication of these programs or introduce administrative burden? And I'll turn to Scott for this one.
Thanks, Amy. So as previously mentioned, the benefits of Fast Track, RMAT, and BTD are somewhat overlapping. And it would certainly be more efficient for us as a sponsor, and I imagine for the FDA as well, if we were to apply for one early designation rather than prepare multiple requests over time for various different designations that give us a similar benefit. You know, the benefits of these designations do vary depending on how far along our program is. You know, the key benefit we're seeking early on, before we make, stage appropriate investments, is the opportunity to get advice from the FDA, especially if it's a brand new modality or a novel therapeutic approach. And we look for that advice to help us manage the uncertainties that are inherent, in our programs. And we would hope that the more promising the new therapy is, the easier it is to get that advice and collaboration, and then more often we can have those interactions. Now, by the time we're getting ready to submit an application, the benefits of a program like Fast Track are much less valuable to us than, something like shortening the review time according to priority review or being able to submit for accelerated approval. So the appeal of these varies over time where we are on the development stage. Now the existing expedited programs, we understand they evolved over time, right? So it's not surprising there's some redundancy. But it sure would be nice to streamline and reduce that redundancy where possible, especially in the early ones.
Yep. So how do we begin to codify best practices and processes for utilizing expedited pathways? And I'd like to turn to Harpreet from FDA to address this first.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And I just really want to reiterate what Scott's talking about, because I could not agree more that the redundancy and, again, kind of the approach to these programs over spanning several decades, really to address needs of the time, which have evolved, kind of create this process, which I do think adds confusion not only on the industry side, but on the FDA side as well. And, I think sometimes we see, and there's a very nice table in the white paper with various icons for timing of Fast Track and Breakthrough designation, where you do see, on a few occasions, a Fast Track and a Breakthrough very closely timed together. And you have to wonder about the effort that goes behind, reviewing these and all the documentation and what the value is there. But I think in order to truly reimagine and redesign this process into perhaps this early versus late approach, is to codify best practices. And you heard this introduced by Dr. Pazdur and Ellen at the outset, but we're terming this beyond breakthrough, which is really to go into what occurs after a breakthrough designation is granted. We spend a lot of time on both sides focusing on the actual designations themselves, and less time understanding what is working well on either side. And one thing that came out of these conversations and that you're hearing today is, while the clinical data we may be able to acquire that quite quickly for these more complex therapies or new therapies, we're seeing manufacturing issues kind of remain or perhaps be the rate limiting step. And if we had a codified process in terms of guidances and public, everyone's aware on both sides exactly what steps should and could be taken after a designation and even before a designation is granted, I think that could really augment this process, minimize confusion, and again, reimagine the process.
Great. Well, I'd like to actually turn to AV, because talking about some of the more complex therapies, this is her area, of course. So what's your response to this?
Thank you, Amy. And I completely agree with what Harpreet just shared. Just have a few additional thoughts, which hopefully will help all the products in expedited pathways, including innovative therapies. I think we need to take a little bit of time to take on the lessons learned And I think the working group has started to do that, which I think is a great beginning of momentum to do that. And perhaps a workshop could help gather all that information. I think, as Harpreet said, updating guidance documents. I've heard that it would be really helpful to have concrete examples of things that have actually helped sponsors in their expedited pathways. I think that would be helpful. And then I think most importantly, as was just shared, is having information on the different steps that can be followed post-designation. In our table 4 in the white paper, we actually, I think, did a great start of outlining these steps. And perhaps we could go further by having a little bit more focus on sort of the pre-breakthrough space, the post-breakthrough, and then the post-approval. And I think there's a lot of area for providing rich input on how to codify these steps for sponsors. How to use communication plans throughout the development would be also really helpful. How to connect with a multidisciplinary project manager would also be really helpful to have continuity throughout the development. And lastly, I think it might be helpful to think about how products or programs that are designated could participate in pilot programs and how that can help test new regulatory tools to further improve these expedited pathways. So in a nutshell, we've talked about simplifying also the programs to remove overlap. So I think a mix of guidance and tips, as well as thinking about simplifying the programs, will help sponsors and most importantly, help these programs go forward for patients. And we really appreciate that the agency is taking steps towards thinking about how to make these improvements. I think it will be really helpful.
Okay, well, we've had a diverse group of opinions, and so and we had a lot of fun in this working group together as we came up with these proposals. And so I want to put a last quick question to the group for anyone who wants to answer. What has surprised you most from these working group discussions, and where do you see the greatest opportunity? And I'm going to open this up.
I can take a stab, Amy. I think the thing that was most surprising was actually how open everyone was to reimagining the programs. I didn't see any preciousness with wanting to hang on to historical reasons for why they were developed. You see a lot of really good best practices shared. So I think the great opportunity is to see how these programs have benefited on both sides and try to integrate those into how you not only streamline and improve them, but also expand them to greater benefit for outside of oncology and et cetera.
For me, it was interesting to see how quickly we converged in coming up with proposals. It was really good to see that even though we came from very different perspectives, we really aligned quickly on the need to modernize the expedited pathways programs. So I think to me that was a surprise. I expected that it would take longer.
So I would like to put a surprised insertion into our program, because I would like to bring back Dr. Richard Pazdur to comment on what he's heard so far, since he is very invested in these programs. Rick?
Well, thank you, Amy. It's been a delightful experience to sit here and listen to the discussion here. We've had many of these points discussed internally at the FDA. And here again, and you know, Amy, having worked for me for many years, public enemy number one to me is bureaucracy and unnecessary paperwork and redundancy of processes. And when I take a look and stand back at many of these expedited programs, as Harpreet mentioned, they were developed over time, over decades now, they're redundant. And we spend so much time on the designation and forget about what do they really mean and how can we improve upon them. Now, one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about Beyond Breakthrough and make it oncology specific at this time is that there are probably very specific needs and issues with oncology drug development, one of them being dosing, preclinical models, the use of biomarkers, which is becoming more and more routine, but many very specific things that come up in oncology. And that's why we wanted to have many kind of discussions within the oncology community on this. That does not mean that these same programs cannot be exported outside of oncology, but nevertheless, we really wanted to get together the various disciplines that work from the very beginning of drug development to the approval and even post-approval settings to take a look at how these programs can be really reimagined, reformalized, to look at where the pain points are rather than what the designation is. The designation means nothing. It's what occurs afterwards. And that's the important point that we have to emphasize. Here again, we're looking at something that was developed historically by Congress. Okay, let's be quite honest by this. And they have their own legitimate reasons for making different programs at different times. But sometimes it's a good idea to step back and take a look at the big picture issue here. So I could imagine, for example, an early breakthrough setting and a later breakthrough setting, incorporating many of the features, if not all of the features that we have in these programs, but making them at different time points with emphasis at different time points from different disciplines. For example, the preclinical development of a drug might be much more important in the very early development rather than the clinical designation or clinical colleagues being brought in at that time. So there are different pain points in the development of a drug, and those have to be realized, and how we really try to address those pain points, I think, is very important. So I really thank everybody for their participation, and hopefully this is not the end, but just a beginning of reimagining and walking down a new road for the new couple of years here.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your commentary, and I'm sure you will be working on these programs internally and how we can continue to improve them to bring new therapies to the patients who need them. Absolutely. And so now I'd like to wrap up. I highly encourage everyone in the audience to read the white paper for some of the details and nuances, and in particular for some of the proposals that we have detailed in the white paper. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Friends of Cancer Research and for the participation over the months of our working group who came here today as panelists. And now I will turn it back to Jeff.
Great, thanks so much, Amy, and thanks to all of our participants in today's meeting. I'd also like to thank the work from all of our team here at Friends of Cancer Research for putting together this excellent meeting and helping the panelists that you've heard from today think through their deliberations and put together the white paper that you now have access to. I'd finally like to thank all of you for joining us today as we tackle some of these larger issues for drug development. I know on behalf of everyone participating today, we look forward to the next steps to come and thinking about beyond breakthrough. Next week, please join us on Thursday. We'll be hosting day 2 of our annual meeting, where we'll have some more great conversations lined up discussing optimizing accelerated approval. We'll again be joined by OC Director Dr. Richard Pazdur to break down the conversations from both days of the annual meeting. And I assure you this is an event that you won't want to miss. So if you haven't already, be sure to sign up and register, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks so much.